This Taliban is so 2 weeks ago. See them with their robes and their sheets, and some folks in the military, our side, call them man dresses, what they're wearing. It's not exactly politically correct, but it is what it is. This Taliban's over. It's now new, improved, and with all that weaponry, they got a hell of a lot more. So, the new uniforms, the equipment, the lethality, all from us. The Afghan military didn't want it, couldn't use it, whatever, they gave up. And now the Taliban has all of this stuff. And this equipment is now helping to keep Americans maybe away from the airport. Many Americans, as we all know, are trapped in Afghanistan. And it looks very, very dangerous to get to the airport. Trapped, you could even say stranded. Yes, stranded in Afghanistan. That's not a far-fetched statement. Although try to run it by the White House.
Does the president have a sense that most of the criticism is not of leaving Afghanistan, it's the way that he has ordered it to happen by pulling the troops before getting these Americans who are now stranded? Does he have a sense of that?
First of all, I think it's irresponsible to say Americans are stranded. They are not. We are committed to bringing Americans who want to come home. We are in touch with them via phone, via text, via email, via any way that we can possibly reach Americans to get them home if they want to return home.
There are no Americans stranded is the White House's official position on what's happening in Afghanistan right now.
I'm just calling you out for saying that we are stranding Americans in Afghanistan when we have been very clear that we are not leaving Americans who want to return home. We are going to bring them home. And I think that's important for the American public to hear and understand.
Liberals like to call this gaslighting. She's pretending we don't understand the definition of stranded. They can't get out of Afghanistan. It doesn't matter if they have email contact or telephone contact. It is their physical bodies that are stuck in Afghanistan. That is stranded. I want to show you something. This person, these people in the middle of a river, they are stranded in that river. Yes, there's a camera from Inside Edition, apparently, watching the whole thing. We all know they're there, but they are stranded. Does that make sense, Jennifer Psaki? All right. Now, look, in her defense, she works for Joe Biden, who is as wrong and as foggy as they come.
We have no indication that they haven't been able to get in Kabul through the airport. We've made an agreement with the Taliban thus far. They've allowed them to go through.
They have no problem getting into the airport. That's what he said. Hello. Yes, you can see why many Americans would not be flocking to the airport under these conditions and knowing what we know about the Taliban. Joe also said this.
I have seen no question of our credibility from our allies around the world.
Oh, boy. Hello.
The chaotic, ghastly departure, the way that people were falling off the aircraft in their determination to get away and the helicopter shipping people out, says terrible things about the values that we hold and those who we wish to protect. So this is a shame on all of us.
They held Joe Biden in contempt. The British Parliament held Joe Biden in contempt. Joe, they are criticized, and he just denies all this. He denies it or pretends it's not happening. He's been lying all his life. Why would he stop now? Why would he stop now?
What interest do we have in Afghanistan at this point with al-Qaeda gone?
Al-Qaeda gone? No. If only he had called, let's see, the Pentagon.
We know that al-Qaeda is a presence, as well as ISIS, in Afghanistan, and we've talked about that for quite some time.
What is Joe Biden bringing to the table? He's wrong on everything. His experience, time spent in Washington, D.C. is yielding absolutely no results. And when he talks, well, it's cringeworthy. And him making it through a press conference is tantamount to a success in the White House. Just making it through, being able to walk out, being able to hear questions and say something in return. But it's a lot more than that. Although, then again, Joe does not necessarily pass the basic test.
Taking out civilians and vulnerable Afghanis and citizens of our allies who went in with us. The idea of, again, let me get back to the fundamental point I made it. And so my guess is that no matter what, under what circumstances there's not a whole lot of Afghanis. There's a whole lot of Afghanis that just as soon come to America. It's also, I can't think of anyone better to lead this operation than Deanne Criswell of FEMA.
Wow, he shouldn't be in this role, obviously. And anybody watching his performance, the substance of his answers, and the style of delivery, the hesitancy, would ask basic questions about his competence. But that is off limits, according to the fake news.
But the critical tone of the coverage has been obvious to everyone. I'm not just talking about far right-wing coverage, which has been predictably over the top. There was a Newsmax segment alleging that the Afghan mess exposed, quote, Joe's cognitive issues.
That was me! And we can all see him. But somehow that's off limits when it comes to Joe Biden, and we can all see them. You know, Donald Trump never lost his place. He always knew what was going on. Yet the fake news, they wish that to become an issue. They would harp on it when people would not. People didn't see what they pretended was happening. Even that guy himself, the anchorman, he said it.
It's very uncomfortable to talk about. I feel uncomfortable sitting here talking about the president's mental health, about his fitness for office, but that's where we're at. And let's be honest, a lot of our viewers are asking those same questions. Some of them have been for a while.
All right, that's Stelter, and he's going with the viewers are saying that. Actually, that was a fake news-driven story. Right now, the people are actually noticing Joe Biden's lack of competence. Take a look at this poll. This is from the people. And CBS News, actually. Biden's actions as president viewed as incompetent, 51%. Take a look at this headline. It goes a little bit further in description. CBS poll, majority of Americans no longer believe Biden is competent. And some in the fake news are finally, it's way too late. They should have been doing this during the campaign, pressure testing the guy. Now that he's president, I guess now they decide to confront him.
Poll also found that based in part on what's transpired in the last week, a majority of Americans, and forgive me, I'm just the messenger, no longer consider you to be competent, focused, or effective in the job.
Now, we noticed this during the campaign, and we were talking about it. They pretended those issues weren't there, and they helped actually drive public perception because they didn't focus on it, even though they knew about it. The fake news knew about it. By the way, how did Joe handle this question?
I haven't seen that poll.
It's out there from CBS this morning. What would
Joe. And by the way, I call him Joe, and that's my right. Why not? Why not? They don't like it when I do that, by the way.
There was a Newsmax segment alleging that the Afghan mess exposed, quote, Joe's cognitive issues. They don't even have enough respect for him to call him the president.
Look, he is the president, but I can call him whatever I want, quite frankly. And the left, the fake news, they were always calling Trump, Trump. They weren't saying President Trump, Mr. President. They were always calling him Trump. And even Joe Biden himself, the first time he met Donald Trump was at the debate last fall. Listen to what he called the sitting president of the United States.
How you doing, man? How are you? I'm well.
How you doing, man? How you doing, man? If that were the other way around, there would have been outrage. All right. Anyway, look, the double standards, we're used to it. It is fun to point it out. Back to the issue at hand, though, Afghanistan. So we're seeing things that we haven't seen in a long time. And what is the fake news now trying to do in something they're calling Operation Change the Subject? Changing the subject.
What could be a big day in the fight against COVID. The FDA is working to approve Pfizer's 2-dose vaccine as soon as today.
We won't have to spend as much time on this show talking about the terrible tragedies that continue to happen across this country because of unvaccinated Americans.
We've seen such devastation from COVID. I'd be willing to take that leap.
We can check those all.
But and while at the same time, there are people that are taking their cows' deworming medicine, they're not taking a vaccine.
See, stop talking about Afghanistan. Stop thinking about it. Let's go back to COVID. Let's try to make fun of what they perceive as Trump supporters. Yeah, it's a familiar playbook. And when we do talk about Afghanistan, they're actually they have the audacity to say this. We don't have to fear al-Qaeda right now. We have to fear their favorite boogeyman.
Let's not forget, Wolf, that right now, the number one terrorist threat to our homeland is what DHS talked about just the other day in a bulletin, which is homegrown, homeborn, white nationalist violent extremism. That is the number one terrorist threat to our homeland.
One of the concerns I have is what this does for recruiting of white nationalist groups. I mean, this has been one of their core issues, is refugees and a sense of Americans losing their identity and their sense of potency, both at home and abroad. And I just think this is a very fraught time for the country.
All right. White supremacy is repugnant. It's also a joke. And it also is 8 guys somewhere in the woods. What we're seeing in Afghanistan, the rise of the Taliban, al-Qaeda, ISIS, this poses a far more grave risk to ourselves. A child could understand this, a child. You know, when I hear this divisive language, and it is divisive, purely political, I think back to the America Joe promised. Remember all that talk about empathy and understanding each other? Yes, on election night when he says he won, the people have chosen empathy. Empathy. How's this for empathy?
We've all seen the pictures. We've seen those hundreds of people packed into a C-17. We've seen Afghans falling.
That was 4 days ago, 5 days ago.
4 days ago, 5 days ago, knock it off. He's not empathetic, I noticed, for anyone else but his family and people very, very close to him. And that's actually becoming an issue. Now, his son, Beau Biden, was a lawyer in the Delaware Army National Guard and served quite honorably in Iraq for about a year. His late son, Beau Biden. Now that's admirable, but Joe has taken that man's service and exploited it. He's exploited it, and now you can't tell Joe anything about military affairs because, well, his son served.
As was referenced by the secretary, my son Beau served in Iraq for a year. Our son Beau's service in the Delaware Army National Guard unit, the year he spent deployed in Iraq. My son, who spent a year in Iraq and died, was a patriot. I carry that burden every day, just as I did when I was vice president. My son was deployed to Iraq for a year. Like my son was sent to Iraq to maybe die.
This is the card he plays. When the generals may tell him, you know what, we might want to do it this way. We really should do it this way. My son, my son. And did you hear that one part, actually? Was he implying something happened that didn't happen?
My son, who spent a year in Iraq and died, was a patriot.
For a moment there, he seemed like he implied that his son died in Iraq. No, he died a few years later of a brain situation, brain cancer, I believe. Very sad, but I believe that Joe is exploiting it both publicly and behind the scenes. He shows great empathy and concern, and quite frankly, loves to talk about tragedy that afflicted him. But tragedy that afflicts others, like what is befalling those in Afghanistan right now. You remember this again, these ludicrous images, sad, maddening, people falling off planes. What was his reaction when asked point blank about this failure?
That
falling.
was 4 days ago, 5 days ago.
4 days ago, 5 days ago. I don't know if I would notice it if Joe did not tell us he was the most empathetic man to ever enter the White House.
It's going to take all of us working together. And that's not hyperbole. All of us working together. Watching out for one another. At this time, in this place, let's start afresh. All of us. Let's begin to listen to one another again. Hear one another. See one another. Show respect to one another.
Listen, hear, respect one another. It all sounds beautiful, but unfortunately, it's all shtick. It is all a political act. This is Joe Biden yesterday speaking at the White House.
I don't trust anybody, including you. I love you. But, you know, there's not a lot of people I trust.
Not a lot of people he trusts. Doesn't trust go with respect and listening and hearing and seeing and this kinder, gentler America he told us he would lead us to, all uniting? He doesn't trust many people. He's bad news, very bad news.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.